All right, so we looked at keyboard QWERTY mapping in the last video, and now we're going to look at MIDI mapping in specific MIDI controllers. What is MIDI? I've gone over this, but you see MIDI everywhere. There's MIDI effects, there's MIDI tracks, etc., etc. MIDI is not audio. This is an audio track. It's just a loop, right? This MIDI isn't audio, it's information, okay? So if I insert a couple little clips in here, I'm going to hear nothing. There is information, but there's nothing to connect it with. So I would just simply go and get any kind of MIDI instrument, and if I'm lucky, I have some information here that I can add. Okay, this is MIDI. Now, what's the difference between MIDI tracks, MIDI instruments, MIDI effects, and MIDI controllers? In the Preferences window, we go here, and I have a MIDI sync tab. So I want you to go ahead and open that up. And in here, we see MIDI ports in and out. And these IAC drivers are, it's called Inter-Application Control, I believe it stands for. And this allows Ableton to send and receive MIDI to and from other compliant applications on the computer. This is an advanced topic and something we're not going to get into, but just in case you wondered about it. But when I plug in a MIDI controller, this window is going to change. Now, MIDI controllers come in hundreds of different varieties these days. Back in the 80s and 90s, a MIDI controller had a whole different cabling setup. It had a very, very complicated set of parameters around it. Now, it's quite simple as long as you're using a USB class-compliant device. Right here is a USB cable, got the very wide end there, and then the narrow end goes into your computer. A lot of MIDI controllers are USB powered. In other words, they don't require a wall wart at all. Like this one here. Like this one here just has a USB port, but no power at all. If your controller requires power, make sure that the wall wart is plugged in. And then when I insert this cable into the computer, it's what's called a class-compliant device. It's going to automatically show up in here. If for some reason you have a controller that isn't class-compliant, you're going to be in for some damage because you got to go and install drivers so that Ableton Live can see it. But 99% of you are not going to have this problem. All right, let me plug this in and let's watch this window. Okay, you can see right away that the lights have lit up. I have inputs and outputs. This Livid Ohm RGB Slim is what this is. It's one of my favorite controllers. And it automatically defaults to these tracks being on and remote being on. Tracks refer to the ability of this controller to affect the tracks within Ableton Live. Remote involves the ability to map knobs and etc. to the controller. When I select this, you can see here in this little window, I'm just going to hide preferences and go up here. I'm going to show my information view because right up here, it shows the MIDI track in indicator. That corresponds to the tracks setting. Okay, MIDI track in. What's this right here? This is the key in MIDI remote. But you can see that automatically out of the box, this is controlling that slider. This one's controlling the other, etc. I'll bet the crossfader even works. Nope, it doesn't. So in the case of the fader, I see MIDI in, and that little flashing light corresponds. But in the case of the crossfader, I don't see any MIDI in at all. Okay, what is this? This has to do with, we go back to Preferences, get into the MIDI Sync tab, and this has to do with this menu here. I have to tell Ableton Live what kind of a controller I'm using. It's smart, but it's not that smart. So I have to do this pull-down menu, And as you can see, this is quite advanced, a set of controllers. And if you're lucky, your controller is going to be on this. I'll point out that when you look at your list of controllers, you're not going to see anything from Livid. Why is that? Well, I had to go to the interweb and on the Livid website and find what's called a Livid controller script. And then I just installed that. So if your control surface doesn't show up here, go up to the interweb and search for my controller, whatever the name is, controller script. And likely there's going to be either a factory script or somebody has built one that they're going to share with you. And when I select Livid Ohm modes, two things happen. I now see this red bar, which indicates that I am now controlling that set of clips with this control surface. But I also need to do two other things. I need to say Ohm RGB controls on input and output. Okay, and you notice that that did something that changed everything for me right here. And now I have greater access. This crossfader is going to work. My clip launches will work. A lot of stuff just works right out of the box. Okay, and now I have deep functionality built in. This has pages. This allows me to control drum racks and instruments. There's another page here for more loop style recording. This is crossfader control. You see AB stuff. And this is a factory Python script, a remote control script. Okay, so that is the basics of setting up a MIDI controller. And if you have a script built for your controller, man, are you in luck. Okay, does that make it so that rather than, A and B go into sends, I wanted to control something else? I can absolutely do that. And we're going to do that in the next video. It's called Mapping Fader.